My name is Mark. I'm 31 and I grew up the youngest and only son in a house held together by fragile threads. My mom passed away when I was 1, leaving only a patchwork memory of lullabies and half-remembered faces. My father remarried when I was 4, a woman who hasn't replaced my mother, but who has earned her own place in my life. My stepmom. I have 2 older sisters, Mel and Kat. They don't consider my stepmom much, never have. She's not their mother, and they treat her accordingly, polite, but distant. For me, though, she's had to walk a thin line, not as the original mom, but as a consistent presence, calm, kind, and patient. That hasn't made our family picture whole, though, in theory. We tried celebrations, meals, routines, but underneath was a silent equation: you are not yours. Mark, you belong to this newly formed family. That was the message I internalized. My dad expected me to call my stepmom mom, demanded that I let her adopt me, and punished silence when I talked about my birth mother, even with my sisters or looking at photos. Every mention of my mom was met with guilt or rebuke. My father said it was disrespecting the woman who raised me. That stepmom was the only mother I'd ever known. It felt oppressive, but I couldn't explain why it hurt, because I barely remembered mom's face. Yet her memory lived in whispers, in old photographs, in the stories my sisters told me. My stepmom didn't push, she let me choose. But my dad, he hated it. The one time he stormed at me, it was the year I left for college. He said, "Once you're a man, you'll see this is your home now." I left, numb, never fully understanding why honoring my mother made him uncomfortable. Over time, my relationship with dad kind of leveled off. I got married. I tried to be a good son and husband. I accepted that he might never be proud of me on his own terms. My stepmom and I got closer. She seemed to accept me as I was, loving tradition, but allowing grief to exist too. Now I'm a father of 2, and we're expecting our 3rd. The roles shifted overnight. I had no idea how fragile things would feel until they broke. We hosted a casual weekend of family and friends in our home. The kids ran around. I showed my dad the photo of mom framed next to our mantelpiece. That's where my daughter pointed at it and asked, "Is that Grandma?" He froze. I watched his jaw clench, and a crease formed deep on his forehead. He stared at the photo as if it were a sharp blade. Then he erupted. Without warning, he began yelling, asking, "Why do you still keep that photo? Why does she call a memory her grandma? Why do you still call her your mom when she's not here?" His words erupted like gunfire, loud and relentless. He called me childish, attached to a dead past. He cursed. He demanded I explain why my sisters had poisoned me with grief. He said stepmom was all I deserved, and if I didn't stop acting like a kid, I'd never amount to anything. My stepmom tried to intercede, her face pleading, but I knew which side she was quietly forced to take. My heart hammered. My blood felt heavy. I could feel my throat tighten. That was the moment I knew I had to choose: continue shrinking under an oppressive shadow, or reclaim my grief, my heritage, and my U-shaped family legacy. I told him calmly but firmly to leave. "You're not leaving quietly." He demanded answers. He cursed, but I didn't give in. Before his pride twisted wider, I escorted him out. I watched his face go from fury to hurt to denial as he left our home, the home I built. When he slammed the door, I felt relief. That night after I told Dad to leave, the silence in our house was deafening. My wife came over, put her hand gently on my shoulder, and said, "You did what you had to do." But I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like a son who had just locked a door on his own father. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, messages, voicemails, some from my dad, others from family, a few texts from extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. The messages varied in tone, some scolding, others pleading, but the common thread: "You overreacted. He's your father. You shouldn't have embarrassed him in front of everyone." Apparently, my dad had already rewritten the story, framing the incident as a personal attack against him. He said I had disrespected him, dishonored my stepmom, and humiliated him during a family celebration. One of my aunts even had the nerve to text, "You're a father now. How would you feel if your child kicked you out one day?" The guilt rolled in waves, but it wasn't guilt for what I did, it was guilt for having to do it. My sisters, Mel and Kat, were the only ones who checked in without judgment. Kat called me first. He told me what happened, but only his side. I figured there was more. I told her everything from the photo to the blow-up to the screaming. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Mark, you know he's always hated that we remember Mom, but that doesn't make your grief invalid. You're allowed to keep her memory alive." I nearly choked up hearing that, because for years, I felt like I had to grieve in secret, hide the fact that I longed for a mother I never got to know. Mel was more blunt. "He's mad because you didn't let him rewrite history. He spent your whole life trying to act like Mom never existed." And that's exactly it. My dad, in all his rigidity, had tried to edit out my mother's presence like a bad chapter in his life. He had convinced himself that if I stopped mentioning her, if we stopped honoring her, then somehow he could start fresh. But healing doesn't work like that. You don't erase loss, you integrate it. That week, I stayed mostly off my phone. My kids went back to their normal routines. My wife held everything together with grace, knowing this was more than a family spat. This was the unspooling of 30 years of silent tension. Then the letters started arriving. First was a handwritten note from my dad. It was short, cold, and formal. "I expected more from you. Your behavior was disgraceful. If you continue to poison your children with memories that do not serve this family, I cannot support your decisions as a parent." It was signed only with his name, no love, Dad, no warmth. Then a message from my stepmom. Hers was softer. "I don't want to be in the middle. I know your father has always been firm about certain things, but I never wanted to replace anyone. I'm sorry it got this far." That part hurt more than my dad's letter because it revealed how much she was also a prisoner to his emotional narrative. She had tried for years to walk a tightrope, but it turns out, silence sometimes sides with power. I realized something then: my dad didn't just hate that I remembered my mother. He hated that I was no longer under his emotional control. He used respect as a weapon. He cloaked shame under the word family. He believed parenthood granted him permanent authority, not realizing that true respect is earned, not inherited. But the biggest turning point came a few days later when I received a text from his best friend, Uncle Dan. Dan was like a second uncle growing up. He'd known our family for years and had remained close with both my dad and stepmom. His message was long, but it had one line that changed everything. "You know, your mom used to tell me that your dad struggled to look at you because you looked too much like her." That line hit me like a freight train. It explained everything. The avoidance, the anger, the refusal to let me speak her name. He didn't just dislike the memory, he was haunted by it. Every time he saw me, he saw the woman he lost, and instead of facing that pain, he buried it and tried to bury me with it. I sat with that truth for hours. And that's when I stopped blaming myself. This wasn't about me being disrespectful. This wasn't about a photo. This was about my dad never making peace with grief and punishing everyone who had. But I wasn't going to be punished anymore. If I had to choose between a peaceful lie or an uncomfortable truth, I'd choose truth every time. And if that truth meant being the villain in his story, so be it. Because I wasn't going to let him poison my kids the way he tried to poison me. Revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's silence where there used to be obedience. A locked door where there once was an open invitation. And in my case, it started with a decision so quiet, so defiant, it terrified my father more than shouting ever could. I made a promise to myself that my children would never be weaponized the way I had been. That weekend, I took down every family photo that included just my stepmom and dad, not to erase them, but to make space for someone who had been absent too long, my mother. I printed every photo Mel and Kat had of her and framed them with care. I placed one on the mantle, one by our bed, and a special one in each of my children's rooms. My wife noticed immediately. "They're beautiful," she said softly. "She looks like you." That night, I sat with my oldest, just 3 years old, and told her the truth, the simple truth, that there are two women who love her, one she knows, and one who watches from the stars. I told her grandma was brave and kind, and I missed her even though I never really got to know her. My daughter, in her innocence, hugged the photo and whispered, "Hi, Grandma." It wasn't vengeance. It was restoration. But make no mistake, this was my line in the sand. I stopped texting my father. No more updates, no photos of the kids, no polite invitations. I didn't tell him he was cut off. I just let the silence speak louder than words. A week later, I got an email from him. He was angry, furious, even. The subject line read, "Your pettiness is hurting your children." The message was venomous. He accused me of brainwashing my kids, of turning them into pawns. He said I was spitting on everything he built and that my loyalty to a ghost was destroying our family. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Kat and Mel and asked if they'd help me create a memory book about our mom for the kids. We spent 2 full weekends together sorting through old letters, recording voice notes, scanning faded photographs. We laughed, we cried, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged in my own history. It wasn't long before word got out. My dad's sister, my aunt, sent me a text after seeing one of the framed photos during a visit. "Your mom would be so proud of you. I never said it before, but your dad never gave himself time to grieve. He pushed us all to forget." It confirmed what I already knew. My father didn't just banish my mother's memory from me, he exiled it from the entire family. But that exile ends here. The final stroke of my revenge came when I sent an open letter to the family group chat. It was short, calm, firm. "I've made the choice to honor both of my parents' biological and step. That means my mother will be part of my children's lives through stories, pictures, and love. I understand not everyone agrees with this. That's fine, but this boundary is not up for negotiation. My home will not be a battleground for someone else's unresolved grief." I hit send. The chat was silent for hours. Then Kat replied with a single word, "Amen." Followed by Mel, "About time." A few cousins liked the message. My aunt sent a heart, but my dad nothing, not a word, not a reaction, total silence. And you know what? That silence was a win. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't cave to his rage. I didn't try to justify or explain or ask for understanding. I just lived in my truth, out loud. And that scared him more than anything. You see, when someone builds their identity on control, the moment you no longer bend, they lose their power. My dad wasn't mourning a son who walked away. He was mourning the loss of dominion. And as for my stepmom, she quietly reached out with a text. "I understand now. I wish your father did too." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough for now. The beauty of quiet revenge is that it doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with foundations, concrete ones. While my father fumed in silence, I was building something far more powerful, a legacy. The memory book project with my sisters turned into a full-on documentary-style family history. Mel, who had some background in media, suggested we record audio interviews with people who had known Mom, teachers, neighbors, an old friend from college. One even cried when she heard my voice and said, "You sound just like her." We compiled it all. Her favorite songs, her handwritten letters, childhood memories from relatives, all of it. We titled it "For the Grandkids She Never Got to Hug." It was beautiful, honest, and most of all, it was healing. My kids lit up every time we played the short film. They knew their grandmother, not as a shadow, but as a story. One with love, one with laughter, one that would never again be erased by my father's bitterness. I didn't hide this from my stepmom. In fact, I sent her a copy. She replied with a voicemail. Her voice cracked halfway through. She would have been proud. "Thank you for sharing her with me." The circle of empathy was growing, but my father still silent. Until the family reunion. It was hosted at my cousin's house that year, a backyard barbecue filled with squealing kids and the smell of grilled perfection. I had no intention of bringing drama. My wife and I planned to keep it low-key. Avoid him, smile politely. But fate had other plans. My daughter, ever the innocent spark, walked up to a table of elders holding the memory book like it was a treasure. She flipped to a page and said, "That's my grandma. She's an angel and watches me sleep." The table lit up with warm smiles. Some nodded, others chuckled. A few flipped through the book, but just over her shoulder stood my father. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. He stormed over, yanked the book from the table, and hissed through his teeth, "I told you this would tear the family apart." I calmly stood and took the book back. "No, Dad, you did years ago, when you tried to erase her." He stepped forward, puffed up like he was ready to fight, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the crowd. Maybe it was the calm in my voice. Maybe it was the realization that he'd already lost. because instead of yelling, I simply turned to the group and said, "If anyone wants a copy of the book, we're printing extras next month. It's a gift from our mom, to all of us." That's when it happened. My Aunt Dad's own sister stepped forward and said, "Put me down for 2. Then Kat added 3 for me. Even Mel's teenage son, barely paying attention, raised a finger and said, "1 for Grandma, for school." It was over. He'd been voted out by the very family he thought would always side with him. He left the reunion early. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't even look back. But it didn't stop there. A week later, I received a letter from him, handwritten, 5 pages long, rambling accusations, claims that I had been brainwashed by my sisters, that I had disgraced my stepmother, that he was disowning me for creating a divide in the family. My wife handed me the envelope. "Are you okay?" I nodded. Yeah, because this was never about being accepted by him. It was about reclaiming something he tried to bury. And I wasn't alone anymore. We printed 25 copies of the memory book, sent them to every branch of the family. It spread beyond that: old friends, teachers, distant cousins. The legacy of my mother, once buried under years of forced silence, now lived in the hands of people who remembered, who cared. And my stepmom? She kept reaching out, tentative but genuine. She came to visit one day, just her, no drama, no pretenses. She brought a small box with her. Inside was a locket, 2 pictures, one of her, one of my mom. "I know I'm not her," she said quietly, "but if it's okay, I'd like your kids to have this, so they know we both love them." That was the moment I knew you don't have to destroy one to honor the other. It wasn't about picking sides. It was about integration. Something my father had never learned. After the family reunion, silence followed. Not the peaceful kind, but the charged, electric silence of a man who's lost control and doesn't yet know how to grieve that loss. My dad didn't speak to me for weeks. No calls, no messages, not even to check on the pregnancy of our 3rd child, his 3rd grandchild. His absence used to sting. Now, it said everything. But in his absence, something beautiful emerged. My daughters, young as they are, started asking more questions about their grandma. They knew her now, not as a ghost, but as a woman who laughed in black and white photos, who wrote sweet notes in curvy cursive, who loved lilies and drank her tea too hot. And slowly, our home became a space of remembrance and joy. The memory book wasn't just a project anymore. It became part of our family's bedtime routine. My daughter would point to a page and ask, "Can we read her story again?" I'd nod, every time. But the ripple effects of my dad's anger reached further than I'd anticipated. Apparently, after the reunion, he'd made the rounds, called up relatives, venting, shaming, trying to gather allies. He told them I was undermining my stepmom, trying to split the family, dishonoring the woman who raised me. But this time, people weren't buying it. I heard from my cousin Alex first. He messaged, "Hey, your dad called me, sounded like he's unraveling. Just wanted you to know we're on your side. What you made? It's beautiful." Others chimed in over time. Aunts, old neighbors, even people I barely remembered from childhood sent messages of support. Some told me they cried watching the film. One wrote, "Your mother's smile reminded me of your wedding day. I'm so glad her spirit is alive in your children." Each message was a quiet revolution, each one a brick pulled from the foundation of my father's rigid world. Even Mel and Kat, who had always kept more emotional distance, started softening. We planned a weekend getaway with all the kids. For the first time, the cousins got to bond over shared stories, not just trauma. And my stepmom, she kept coming around. No longer the woman standing in mom's shadow, but someone who had carved a quiet space of her own. She helped my wife with the baby registry, read books to the kids, laughed, genuinely, as my toddler smeared jam on her blouse. The bridge between us had been damaged for years. Now, we were rebuilding not by pretending the past hadn't happened, but by honoring it. All of it. And my dad. He couldn't handle it. One day, he showed up at our door unannounced, red-eyed, wild, holding a wrinkled copy of the memory book in one hand. "You've embarrassed me," he snapped. My wife stepped back, I stepped forward. "No, Dad, you embarrassed yourself. This isn't about you. It's always about you and your damn sisters. Isn't it?" Playing the victims? You think you're better than me? No, I said, calm and unwavering, but I am done being afraid of you. His mouth opened, then closed. He wasn't used to that, to defiance wrapped in peace, not rage, not rebellion, just firm boundaries. He tried again. You let a child call a dead woman grandma. What do you think that does to the woman who raised you? Gives her the freedom, I said, to stop pretending she needs to replace someone she never could. Silence. Then he turned and left. No dramatic exit, just defeat. I haven't seen him since. I don't know if I ever will. And strangely, that's okay. Because peace doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means removing yourself from the battlefield. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing on a battlefield. I was in a home, my home, one filled with memories, both old and new, where every photo on the wall told a story, where my children knew both the women who shaped me. Not as competitors, but as threads in a much larger tapestry. In the weeks that followed, Mel called me more often. Kat even invited us to her lake house, something she hadn't done in years. My wife and I would stay up late talking about how far we'd come, how much had changed. One night she whispered, "You broke the chain, you know." I nodded. Because for generations, silence had been passed down like an heirloom in our family. Silence and control, fear disguised as duty, shame disguised as loyalty. But not anymore. Not in my house. Not for my children. And as for revenge, it didn't come as fire. It came as freedom, as joy, as my daughter giggling under a blanket fort while telling her baby brother, "Grandma's watching. She's magic, you know." She was right, sometimes. The most profound revolutions aren't loud. They don't come with fists slammed on tables or final, cinematic confrontations. Sometimes, they happen quietly in the soft flick of a photo album page, in a child's question, in the words you finally have the strength to say, "I'm done." That's how this chapter closed, not with destruction, but with liberation. And that's the power of boundaries. Not the ones designed to keep people out, but the ones built to protect the peace you've carved through blood, sweat, and emotional labor. Boundaries that whisper to the world, "This is who I am, and I will not apologize for it." This story wasn't just about a father's control or a son's defiance. It was about something deeper, a universal ache so many carry. The ache of being told who you're allowed to grieve. The ache of being expected to move on, perform loyalty, and swallow your truth so others feel more comfortable. The ache of loving someone who demands your silence as proof of that love. We see this play out in families every day. The child who's not allowed to cry for a parent who's passed, the step-parent forced into impossible shoes, the siblings split between old allegiances and new demands, the grandparents who are rewritten out of family lore because their memory makes someone else insecure. And we see the long-term effects: fractured relationships, unresolved grief, inherited emotional avoidance. But here's what this story teaches us. Love doesn't erase what came before. It adds to it. Honoring the dead isn't disrespecting the living. It's claiming your whole truth. And memory is a right, a legacy, a lifeline. For years, my father tried to rewrite the script of our family. He wanted to pretend the pain of my mother's death had never existed, that my sisters were overreacting, that my memories were invalid because they didn't align with his narrative. But you can't silence grief. Not forever. It finds ways to speak through photo albums, bedtime stories, and 3-year-olds who point at a frame and say, "Grandma." That's where justice lies, not in courtrooms or shouting matches, but in reclaiming your right to remember, to tell your story, to correct the narrative where it was twisted. This was never about revenge in the classic sense. It was about choosing peace without permission, about turning away from someone who tried to control how you remember, how you love, and how you heal, and saying no more. It's also about realizing that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is walk away. There's a myth in many families that reconciliation is always the goal, that every bridge can and must be mended. But what if the bridge was never built safely in the first place? What if walking across it always meant injury, pain, risk? Then maybe the bravest thing isn't to rebuild, but to chart a new path. One where your children learn to honor all parts of their lineage. One where grief isn't taboo. One where love isn't used as a weapon. That's the life I've built now. And I won't lie, there are days when doubt creeps in, when I miss the idea of my dad, when I wish things could be easier. But then my daughter grabs her crayons and draws a picture of our family, including a woman she's never met but has come to know through stories, photos, and bedtime memories. She hands it to me and says, "Can we send this to Grandma?" And I say, "We already did, sweetie. She sees it every day." Because in our house, we don't silence the past. We invite it in. We listen, we learn, and we keep moving forward with full hearts and clear eyes. So if you're watching this and you've felt the weight of your own family's silence, if you've ever been told your grief is too loud, your love misplaced, your loyalty flawed, I see you. You're not alone. And you don't have to carry that story in silence. You can break the chain. You can speak the names. You can grieve loudly, love fully, and still choose peace. That's not rebellion. That's healing. And healing is the most powerful revenge of all. Story 2. The valet barely glanced my way when he took the keys to my 10-year-old Corolla. Same distracted smile, he'd flashed the Lexus parked ahead of me, inside Aura, my mother's chosen spot for her 45th anniversary dinner. Everything gleamed. Gold chandeliers dripped light like raindrops made of fire. Ivory linens stretched across tables set with crystal wine glasses so thin they might shatter with a breath. This was my family's world, and I was the outsider. I'm Brier Whitmore, the second daughter, the one who isn't mentioned, the one who's tolerated. Barely. The clock ticked 6:58 p.m. Our reservation was for 700. That meant Sloane, my older sister, was already there, perfectly punctual. As always, the kind of person who thinks being late is a privilege reserved for the irrelevant. The maitre d's eyes scanned me down to my plain black dress, hesitating just a beat too long at the scuffed heel of my boot before softening into a polite smile. Whitmore party. Yes, I said, voice flat. Your sister said you might be joining us? Might be, she repeated like it was a question, a possibility to be debated. Those words didn't shock me. They confirmed everything I'd learned the hard way, that I was optional, an afterthought. The table was tucked into a private corner. Naturally, Sloane was radiant, swathed in a crimson dress that probably cost more than I earned last month. Her laughter sparkled louder than the clinking glassware. She didn't look up when I arrived. Then, without hesitation, she rose, raised her champagne flute, and toasted. To Eleanor and Paul Whitmore, for raising the most extraordinary only child a family could ask for. No one corrected her. No one even glanced my way. That night, I didn't come to be seen. I came to break the silence. Sloane had always been the star, the sun everyone orbited, from the ballet recital to the student council elections. She didn't just participate, she dominated. My parents followed her light as if it was the only one worth noticing. Meanwhile, I blurred into the background, a shadow in family photos. I wasn't shy or difficult, I was quieter, the kind of kid who built dollhouses out of shoeboxes and designed bedrooms and sketchbooks instead of asking for attention. When I was 10, my parents missed my school's art showcase because Sloane had a tennis match. We'll catch the next one, Dad said, barely looking up from his calendar. There was no next one. In high school, I got accepted into an early college interior design program. I printed the acceptance letter and left it on the kitchen counter with a note, "I did it." 2 days later, it vanished. No congratulations, no questions, just silence. My Aunt Lydia and Uncle Frank noticed. They showed up at my presentation, bouquet in hand, smiles proud and real. "You're the real deal, kiddo," Uncle Frank whispered, squeezing my shoulder like it mattered. And it did. Back home, things only got worse. As Sloane rose through her marketing career, every holiday became a highlight reel of her promotions and awards. Once, I casually mentioned a restaurant I'd helped design. Mom blinked, as if surprised I was even working in the field. "You're doing art, right?" she asked vaguely, then turned to Sloane to ask about a billboard with her face on it. I learned to shrink myself, to stop offering pieces of who I was, because no one noticed when I gave. But I still saved every freelance gig, every weekend job. I tucked away $65,000 over 7 years, not because I owed them anything, but because I hoped someday they'd see me. Not just tolerate me, not just remember I existed, but really see me. That envelope in my purse wasn't about money. It was proof. Proof that I mattered. That I was worthy of being part of their legacy. But the moment Sloane toasted my parents for raising the most extraordinary only child, something inside me shifted. The room was alive with clinking glasses and soft laughter, swelling like a rising tide. And still, no one looked my way. Not my mother, her eyes moist but fixed on Sloane. Not my father, raising his glass with unwavering faith. Not even my relatives, people who'd watched me grow up, who simply nodded, smiled, sipped, and pretended I wasn't there. I should have expected it, but expecting it didn't make it hurt any less. I sat at the far end of the long banquet table, half hidden behind a decorative plant, like some misplaced prop. One cousin's boyfriend, not recognizing me, leaned over and asked, "Are you part of the Whitmore family too?" Before I could answer, the servers arrived with champagne flutes. The moment passed as if I were invisible. The envelope pressed hard against my thigh. Cream-colored, thick paper, the symbol of years I could never reclaim. I scanned the room again, the answer painfully clear. No one here would ever choose to see me, except Lydia and Frank. They always had. Sitting apart from the table, not out of exclusion but simply because that was who they were, quiet, steady, unafraid to be real. I stood and smoothed the front of my dress. No one noticed. Conversations flowed on. My mother reached for her wine. My father checked his watch. Sloane launched into another story about a viral ad campaign. I walked steadily across the room and placed the envelope in front of Lydia and Frank. "This is for you," I said, just loud enough for the room to catch the weight in my voice. The chatter stopped. Glasses halted midair. Sloane's laugh cut off like a broken record. My mother's fork clinked against her plate for the first time all evening. Every head turned toward me. Lydia's hand trembled as she touched the envelope. "Brier, what is this?" "Open it when you get home," I replied calmly. I wanted them to hear, to feel the quiet strength of someone no longer invisible. I brushed past Sloane's stunned face, past my mother's frozen smile, past my father's blank stare. No explanation, no tears, just truth. The maitre d', as if summoned, appeared with my coat and helped me on. In the gilded mirror by the entrance, I caught my reflection. Taller than I'd ever felt. Stronger than I knew I could be. I stepped into the cold Connecticut night and didn't look back. That was the moment the silence cracked, and something inside me began to roar. By the time I got home, my phone was a war zone. 17 missed calls. The timestamps marched backward through the night, each one a reminder I hadn't wanted. 10:41 p.m., 9:16, 7:59, 6:03. My voicemail blinked with messages I already knew by heart. The first was from my father, his voice clipped, cold, like a judge delivering a verdict. You've embarrassed this family." No greeting, no pause, just those 4 words. Next came my mother, 2.5 minutes of breathless guilt, spinning tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and how I had shattered their carefully built world in front of everyone. I didn't listen to the rest. Instead, I made tea, letting the steam rise into the quiet of my apartment. The phone buzzed and vibrated, relentless, but I didn't answer. I just sat there, listening to the clink of the kettle and the soft tap of porcelain. At noon, Sloane sent a text, a screenshot of something I'd written to Aunt Lydia 3 years ago, during a breakdown that felt endless. Sometimes I want to scream until they finally remember I exist. Her caption, "Clearly, you've been unstable for a while. We're all very concerned." I blocked her number. Then I blocked my parents. The silence that followed wasn't painful, it felt clean, like finally wiping a fogged window to see the world again. Aunt Lydia called soon after, her voice soft, trembling. "We haven't opened the envelope yet. Are you sure about that?" "Yes," I said. "You've always seen me, that's all I ever wanted." A pause. Then Uncle Frank's voice, low and stunned, This is $65,000. I replied gently, "You earned it, you showed up, you were there when no one else was." I heard Aunt Lydia's soft sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "We always saw you, sweetheart, even when they didn't." That night, I slept 9 full hours. No nightmares, no rehearsed apologies, just rest. The next morning, the clarity was immediate, like a window had been thrown open in my chest. I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. Dear Mom and Dad, I release you from the obligation of pretending to love someone you never really knew, and I release myself from the burden of trying to earn it. Please don't contact me again. I wish you peace, but I am done pretending. I hit send, and I didn't look back. I took down the photo frames from my living room, the ones with my mother's posed smiles, my father's stiff stares. I wrapped them in newspaper and boxed them up. History preserved, but no longer invited into my present. Days passed, the silence deepened. But unlike before, it didn't echo. It held me. It steadied me. Until one Sunday afternoon, a silver Lexus pulled up to my driveway. It felt like a threat wrapped in leather upholstery. My parents stood on my porch, looking like diplomats of some fading empire. Mom wore her signature pearls and beige wool coat, posture rigid, expression composed. Dad clutched a manila envelope like it was a shield. They didn't knock. They waited for me to open the door. I did. You can come in for 20 minutes. I said, I have a client meeting at 3. A lie, but necessary. Inside, they looked out of place amid my curated comfort hand-woven rugs, custom shelves, walls filled with photos of friends and projects, memories they'd never been part of. Mom's eyes scanned everything, hunting for signs of instability. Dad stood stiff, briefcase unopened. We brought some things you might want to see, Dad said, pulling out old photos and spreading them on my coffee table. Baby pictures, school awards, birthday snapshots blurred by time. Mom perched on the couch's edge. We've been thinking, Brier, about healing, about family, about finding a way forward. I said nothing. Instead, I went into the kitchen and started making tea. You haven't returned our calls. Mom's voice trembled just enough to sound concerned. You called when you needed to manage an image, I said. When was the last time you called just to ask how I was? She blinked, thrown off. Dad shifted uncomfortably. I returned with the tea tray and set it beside their curated photo offering. You always had support, I said. Dad snapped. Look at these moments. We were there. I pulled out my old paper calendar from a nearby drawer, edges frayed from years of moving it around, never throwing it away. May 15th, 2010, my first solo design exhibit. I invited you. Carol drove 4 hours to be there. You RSVP'd yes. You never came. I flipped to the next tab. December 3rd, 2012, emergency appendectomy. The hospital asked if I had next of kin. I gave them your numbers. Neither of you answered. Lydia stayed through the night. Dad's face flushed. We had commitments, he muttered. Your sister, always your sister. I said quietly, but unwavering. I wasn't difficult. I just wasn't her. Mom's tears came real ones this time, but I had no energy left for performances. We can fix this, she said. We can go to counseling. Sloan agrees. Sloan isn't welcome in this conversation, I interrupted. Not anymore. Dad rose, anger swelling. We raised you. No, I said firmly. You raised Sloan, I raised myself. They stood there, two people who once held all the power. Now, just guests overstaying their welcome. I walked to the front door and opened it. I wish you peace, I repeated. But I need space. They hesitated, then left. I closed the door, stood still for a long moment, breathing in the quiet, then poured my tea. It had gone cold. But it tasted like truth. The morning after they left, the apartment felt different, lighter, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for years. The silence wasn't empty, it was mine, a space I could fill on my terms. No calls, no messages, just quiet. At first, it felt foreign, almost like I was waiting for the phone to ring or the door to knock, but day after day, that silence became comfort, a promise that I didn't have to prove anything anymore. Aunt Lydia called a few days later, her voice soft but steady. We haven't touched the envelope yet, she said, but we've been talking. Would you be okay if we used some of it to start a scholarship for design students, kids like you? I felt my throat tighten. Only if my name's on it, I replied. Of course, came the answer. The next week, a small notice appeared in the local paper, the Brier Whitmore Design Scholarship Quiet, tucked between a pancake breakfast fundraiser and a winter festival ad. But to me, It was louder than any family toast or applause I'd never heard. That same week, Maris showed up at my office, a quiet girl with big dreams and a worn sketchpad. She held a printed email from her advisor, asking if I might mentor someone who needed a chance. Her designs were raw but full of heart. I asked her what she wanted her spaces to feel like. "I don't know if I'm allowed to want anything," she said softly. "I just want to do it right." "You're allowed," I told her. "You don't need permission to take up space." That became our first lesson. Slowly, my apartment began to change. The walls, once bare and bare bones, filled with framed sketches from Maris, snapshots of Lydia and Frank, and pieces of projects I had hidden away, too afraid to share. One snowy evening, I hosted a simple open house, nothing flashy, just cider, cookies, and people who showed up because they cared. I stood in my kitchen, watching faces that felt like family. No one asked about my parents, no one mentioned Sloan. We all understood why this night mattered. In that warmth, with music low and laughter spilling through the hallways, I realized I hadn't just left something behind. I had built something better. Peace wasn't about perfect milestones or shiny legacy. It was mismatched mugs on the table, warm socks and quiet smiles, the smell of cinnamon in Frank's old flannel, Lydia humming softly while watering plants, Maris beaming as she unveiled her first commissioned mural, and me no longer shrinking to fit their story, but standing tall in my own. 3 months since that dinner. No real word from my parents, just a few passive-aggressive holiday cards, unsigned, unaddressed, quietly wishing me the best. I didn't open them, filed them away with my hospital bracelet, unopened RSVP cards, and memories of their silence. But my life, my real life, has never been louder. The scholarship received its first applications. A girl who grew up in foster care, sketching architectural plans on napkins. A boy whose dad laughs at his love for color palettes but dreams of designing healing spaces for veterans. Every story felt familiar. Every voice echoed a whisper I used to carry in the dark. Please let me matter. Now I get to answer. You already do. Last week, I visited Maris's studio. She stood amid a half-painted mural, emeralds and copper curling around the wall like living vines. "It finally feels like my work is saying what I couldn't," she told me. And I knew exactly what she meant. The old family photos are gone now, replaced by frames filled with people who choose me, who welcome me without asking me to shrink. My walls aren't curated for approval anymore. They're layered with life, love, and light. Sometimes, when I water the basil, rosemary, and thyme on my windowsill herbs Lydia helped me plant, I think about that restaurant. How I thought $65,000 and a letter could buy love. How I instead gave everything to the people who asked how I really was. People who never needed a perfect toast or a photo op to prove I belonged. These days, I don't shrink from the word family. I just define it differently. Family is who shows up when it isn't convenient. Family is who sees you in the shadows and never looks away. Family is chosen. I didn't walk away because I was bitter. I walked away because I was finally ready to stop proving I mattered. And the moment I did, I became someone I could believe in. I see me now. That's enough. The days after that open house felt like a new beginning. The weight I'd carried for years, the need for approval, the silent rejection began to peel away, layer by painful layer. I started waking up without that knot of dread in my stomach. Instead, there was curiosity, a gentle kind of hope. What could I build now that I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's story? I invested more time in Maris's mentorship. Watching her grow, finding her voice in her work, reminded me of my own journey from invisible to indispensable, from overlooked to owning my space. Her first commission came sooner than I expected. A local cafe wanted a mural that told a story of resilience and renewal. She invited me to the unveiling. Standing there beside her, seeing her eyes light up as strangers admired her work, I felt proud like a mother, but also like a sister. We were family, now chosen family. One chilly evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The city was quiet except for distant laughter and the soft hum of streetlights. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Theo. "Thinking about hosting a game night, you in?" I smiled. Years ago, I wouldn't have dared. Too shy, too burdened with fear that I didn't belong. But now, I wanted to celebrate life with people who lifted me up. That game night was filled with laughter, jokes, and moments where I wasn't just the quiet girl in the corner, I was Brier, bold, confident, seen. Then came a surprise email. The scholarship board wanted me to speak at a local youth conference about resilience. Standing before a room full of eager, uncertain young people, I told my story, not just the pain, but the power of reclaiming your own life. How many of you have felt invisible, I asked. Hands went up. That feeling, that ache, it doesn't have to define you. You can build a life that sees you, honors you, and sometimes, I paused. That means walking away from those who never made space for you. After the speech, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. Thank you, I thought I was alone. You're not. I said, none of us are. That night, Nolan called. He'd been quiet through most of my story, but hearing it out loud seemed to release something. You're incredible. Brier, you've taken what broke you and made it into something no one can take away. I laughed. It wasn't easy. No, but you did it. That call reminded me that freedom isn't just escaping the past, it's choosing who you become because of it. Months passed, and the silence from my biological family stayed. The holiday cards still unopened, filed away like old wounds best left untouched. But this time I didn't flinch, because my real family, the one I built with Lydia, Frank, Maris, Theo, Emma, held me steady. One crisp fall afternoon, as the leaves turned gold, I walked into a design studio of my own making. My name was on the door. The walls were filled with bold colors, vibrant textures, and stories of clients who had found their voice through my work. I wasn't just a designer, I was a creator of spaces where people could be seen, just like I finally was. That evening, as I closed the studio, I thought back to that night in the restaurant, the toast, the envelope, the silence breaking. I realized then the silence didn't erase me, it made room for my own voice to roar. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible, I was undeniable. And that, more than anything else, was freedom. Story 3. They laughed about my mother, right there, in front of me, surrounded by 100 people who were supposed to be celebrating love. They raised their glasses and made cruel jokes, mocking the woman who gave everything to help them. And my fiancée, she smiled through all of it. My name is Callum Price, and this is the story of how I canceled my own wedding, publicly, permanently, because the family I was about to marry into didn't just disrespect me, they mocked the dead. This isn't a tale of heartbreak, not really. It's a story about boundaries, about dignity, and about standing up for those who no longer can, about knowing exactly when to walk away even if you're already halfway down the aisle. That night, I lost my fiancé, but I found something far more valuable: self-respect and the courage to say enough. My mother's name was Irene Price. She wasn't flashy or loud. She didn't need to be. She was the quiet force behind everything good in my life, the kind of person who showed up, without fanfare, day after day. She raised me on her own after my father left when I was 10. Money was tight, but love was abundant. Irene worked as a nurse for over 3 decades, ran a church pantry on weekends, and still found time to help me with my school projects even when she was exhausted. Cancer took her after a brutal 4-year battle. From a shadow on an X-ray to hospice care, she fought like a warrior, eyes sunken, voice weak, but always asking if I'd eaten. That was my mom. Even when she was suffering, she worried about others. But the family I was about to marry into, they didn't see her that way. Lydia's family treated her passing like just another item on their social calendar. They showed up to the funeral dressed in designer black, nodded politely, then left early to beat the traffic. They never spoke of what she did for them. Never mentioned how, when their family restaurant was days from closing, my mom had co-signed their loan, or how she covered Ryan's college tuition without a second thought. She paid for a new industrial oven when theirs broke down. She restructured their chaotic books, all while quietly battling hospital bills she hid from me. Irene believed in second chances and never asked for repayment. And yet, these people, Jack, Donna, Ryan, they talked about her like she was background noise. Lydia, the woman I loved, barely even saw my mother for who she was. She tolerated her, smiled through visits, Called her too involved when she thought I wasn't listening. I still loved Lydia. I made excuses for her family. I told myself marrying someone meant accepting their past even when it didn't look like what I grew up with. My mom would have told me to keep my heart open, but never to let anyone step on it. I wish I'd listened. When I proposed, I believed it was right. I gave Lydia my grandmother's ring, the same one Irene wore after my grandfather died. She said yes. For a moment, I thought everything would fall into place. But it didn't. It cracked quietly, then shattered. I should have seen it coming when I felt like a guest at my own wedding. Planning with Lydia was a slow lesson in exclusion. We sat in her parents' living room surrounded by Donna's wedding magazines and Jack's unsolicited advice. They had opinions about everything from flowers to valet parking. I bit my tongue and told myself they were just excited. But every time I suggested including something meaningful to me, especially about my mother, they shut it down. Polite silence or sharp pivots. I asked for a simple tribute, a scarf, one of my mom's favorites, draped on an empty front row chair. Lydia glanced up from her phone. Callum, I get it, but do you really want people crying at the wedding? I want this to be a celebration. Celebration as if grief had an expiration date, as if honoring my mother would ruin the champagne. I let it go. Then I asked if we could include one of my mom's recipes, the rosemary biscuits she baked every holiday. Donna blinked, then muttered, "Sounds rustic. Let's stick with the truffle risotto." I was being erased, gently, politely, completely. Lydia wasn't cruel, not in a way you could point to and say, "Look." But when I raised concerns, she deflected. "My parents are just trying to help. You're overthinking it. Let's just get through the next few weeks." Peace for who I wanted to scream. A week before the rehearsal dinner, I suggested seating my aunt and cousin closer to the front. Donna said, "They'll be fine where they are. Tables are arranged to reflect significance." What did that even mean? I knew it was code for, your people aren't people aren't our priority. That night, when I mentioned to framing a photo of my mom for the decor, Donna flipped a page and said, "Irene had interesting taste, but this is Lydia's wedding. Let's keep it current." Lydia kept scrolling Pinterest. No blink, no defense. I went home with a pit growing in my stomach. I stared at my mom's keepsake box, the letters, photos, the worn silk handkerchief, the locket passed down for generations. She'd told me, one day, you'll know the right person to give this to. For months, I thought that person was Lydia. But I hadn't touched the box in weeks. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a bridge, a moment where our families came together. Instead, it was a stage for a cruel performance. Jack and Donna packed the room with business partners, distant cousins, people who'd never met me. My family was a handful of seats in the corner. We didn't fit in. We weren't meant to. I pulled Lydia aside. "Why isn't more of my family here?" She shrugged. "Your side's smaller. My parents needed to fill the room." Not a big deal. That was her line for everything. Then came the speeches. Jack strutted to the mic, gave a condescending nod to me, and began a glowing tribute to Lydia. Then his smile twisted. "And now she's marrying someone who will keep her grounded." The smirk, the chuckles, I didn't laugh. Donna followed. "Lydia has the patience of a saint, and she's taught Callum so much about class and taste." Her final jab. "We're thrilled to welcome someone who doesn't mind rolling up his sleeves." I stared, wondering if she even knew how insulting she was. Then Jack took the mic again. "Before we wrap, I want to acknowledge someone important who couldn't be here, Callum's mother, Irene." I thought maybe finally something kind, but no. She was one of a kind, always had an opinion, loved to insert herself where she wasn't wanted. Laughter. Polite, awkward laughter. They mocked her generosity, her kindness. Jack winked. That was it. That wink shattered something in me. I glanced at Lydia. She giggled and whispered, "Oh, Dad, stop." Harmless fun. I stood, chair scraping across marble, silencing the laughter. "Are you serious right now?" Jack blinked. Donna smiled sweetly. "Oh, Callum, don't be so sensitive. We were just sharing memories." "You mocked her. You turned everything she gave you into a punchline." Jack leaned back, arms crossed. "Relax. It was all in good fun." "Good fun," my voice cracked. "You called her meddling. You ridiculed her generosity. That wasn't humor. That was cruelty, dressed in a tuxedo. Lydia touched my arm. Callum, please, let's talk outside. I pulled away. No, we're talking right here. Because they had just disrespected the only person who ever cared without asking for anything in return. And you laughed. Gasps rippled through the room. My sister was on her feet, glaring. My father's fists clenched on the table. Donna pleaded. Michael, this is supposed to be a happy occasion. Don't ruin it. I didn't ruin anything. My voice was ice. You did when you spat on my mother's memory. I walked out. No words left. But I wasn't done yet. Outside, cold air hit my face. My heart pounded, jaw locked. I stood shaking not with regret, but rage. Grief. I could have vanished. But then I thought of my mother. She believed silence in the face of cruelty was betrayal. So I went back in. The room had quieted. When people saw me, the murmurs stopped. I walked past Lydia, stunned, and went straight to the front. Excuse me, I have something to say. This wedding is off. Gasps. Lydia stood. No, I said, raising a hand. This isn't a discussion, it's a decision. I faced the crowd. I cannot marry into a family that mocks the dead, dismisses the living, and disguises cruelty as charm. My mother gave everything to this family. They spat on her name. Jack muttered something. I didn't care. She was too generous. That's your insult. I was raised better than this. Then I turned to Lydia. You had a choice. You chose silence. I choose to walk away. And I did. The next morning, my phone was a war zone. Messages and missed calls flooded in Lydia. Her parents, even my own family chimed in. But I was done answering. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted peace. The first message was from Lydia, her words desperate, pleading. Callum, please, we need to talk. This isn't how I wanted things to end. But I didn't respond. Instead, I sat with a cup of black coffee, the bitter taste grounding me in a way nothing else could. I realized the illusion I'd been living with wasn't just about the wedding. It was about everything before it, the silences, the small exclusions, the way my mom was erased bit by bit. Lydia called again that afternoon, voice cracking over the phone. I didn't mean for them to say those things. I didn't laugh. I was scared. I stayed silent. Scared. Scared to stand up for me. For my mother. She wasn't the only one afraid. The people around me, the ones who should have had my back, chose comfort over confrontation. But I chose differently. That afternoon, I pulled out my mother's keepsake box. The locket she'd worn since my grandfather passed was missing. Panic tightened my chest. The only person who'd been in my apartment since Lydia was the one who dropped off the ring. I texted Lydia. Did you take the locket? Her reply was slow. What are you talking about? I pressed her again. Finally, she confessed. I borrowed it. I wanted to feel close to you. I felt the heat rise, burning through every nerve. Where is it? At my parents' house. That was it. I drove over immediately. Donna opened the door, her usual fake smile nowhere to be found. I'm here for the locket. Lydia appeared, eyes swollen, holding it like it was worthless. I took it from her hands. You didn't just insult my mother, I said quietly. You stole from her memory. She started crying. But I didn't stay. That moment gripping the last piece of my mother's legacy, I finally walked away from everything that tried to erase her dignity. The days after, I blocked them all. No calls, no texts, no emails, just silence. For the first time in months, I sat with one of my mom's favorite books. I read quietly. No distractions, no chaos, just peace. Grief isn't a flood that sweeps you away. It's a quiet river running deep. Some days it's heavy, pressing down like stone. Others, it's light, just a breeze. But in that silence after the storm, I realized I wasn't just grieving my mother anymore. I was grieving who I thought Lydia was. Who I thought I was. But pain has a way of cutting through illusions. I kept replaying that night not to punish myself, but to remind myself of my choice. I chose to honor my mother. To stand by her, even when everyone else turned away. It would have been easier to stay silent, to smile and nod, to pretend everything was fine. But easy isn't right. I finally understood what my mother meant when she said, "Doing the right thing rarely feels good at first, but it always feels clean later." Clean. That's the word that kept coming back. Not triumphant, not proud, just clean, like washing off years of quiet compromise. I don't know what Lydia tells people now. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe. But I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was sitting through that wedding pretending nothing was wrong. I still wear the locket sometimes just for a moment. Long enough to remember. Then I tuck it away. Close the lid and move forward. Because I didn't lose when I walked away. I reclaimed myself. The days that followed my decision felt like walking through a fog. At first, I thought the silence would sting, that I'd miss the noise, the conflict, even the pain. But what I found was something different: space. Space to breathe, to think, and to start piecing myself back together. The first step was setting boundaries. No more answering calls that tore at my heart. No more emails trying to drag me back into a family drama I'd long since left behind. I blocked numbers, muted group chats, and deleted the emails that slipped through. It wasn't easy. Every buzz on my phone made my chest tighten. But each time I resisted, the tightness eased just a little. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey, watching city lights flicker in the distance. It struck me how different my life was now. No wedding plans, no forced smiles, no pretending. Just me. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing for anyone else's approval. I began to rediscover things I loved but had buried under family expectations. Design. I remembered the sketchbooks I'd hidden away, the ones full of dreams and colors I was too scared to share. I dug them out and started drawing again. The lines were rough, but they were mine. I shared some of my designs online. Slowly, people noticed. Friends, old colleagues, even strangers sent words of encouragement. It wasn't about fame or money. It was about being seen. I found a local community of artists and creators who welcomed me. They didn't ask about my family or my past. They just saw the work I was proud to share. With them, I started hosting small gallery nights. At first, it was just a few friends and some wine. But soon, more people came. People who believed in second chances and new beginnings. One night, I met Clara. She was an artist with a quiet smile and an even quieter strength. She listened when I told her about the wedding, my mom, the family I was losing. She didn't judge or pity me. She just nodded and said, "You're brave for standing up." Bravery. That was a word I hadn't used for myself in a long time. With Clara's encouragement, I applied for a grant to fund a mural project in my neighborhood. It was a big deal, a chance to bring color and life to a space that had been gray for too long. When the grant came through, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this was the start of something real. As I painted the first strokes on the wall, memories of my mom whispered through the breeze. I imagined her watching, proud. She was the reason I kept going, even when the silence screamed the loudest. Meanwhile, Lydia and her family faded into the background. They tried reaching out once or twice, but I didn't respond. Their words felt hollow, rehearsed. I was done explaining myself. Instead, I focused on healing. Therapy helped me unravel the knots left by years of neglect and rejection. I learned that self-worth isn't something you earn from others, it's something you claim. That night, I made a promise. To myself. To live authentically, without apology. To create a family not bound by blood or tradition, but by love and respect. Friends became my chosen family. We celebrated birthdays, achievements, and quiet Sunday afternoons. I no longer felt the sting of absence when my phone stayed silent on holidays. Because I had built a life where I belonged. One afternoon, I received a message from Clara. She'd brought a group of kids from the local community center to see the mural. Their eyes lit up at the colors and shapes. One little girl whispered, "This is magic." And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just about art. It was about creating a space where everyone, especially those forgotten, could feel seen and valued. I thought about my mom again. How she gave without expecting anything back. How she believed in me when no one else did. I realized that by standing up and walking away, I wasn't abandoning her memory, I was honoring it. Because I was choosing dignity. Choosing love. choosing myself. And that was the greatest legacy she ever gave me. The mural was finished just as spring edged into summer. It wasn't perfect, some lines wobbled, some colors blended in unexpected ways, but it was alive. People stopped to watch, to smile, to take pictures. One afternoon, a local reporter came by and asked if I'd share my story. I hesitated. The old part of me wanted to hide, to keep the wounds private. But then I thought about the kids who'd come to see the mural. The ones who felt invisible? And I said yes. The article ran a week later. It wasn't a viral sensation. It wasn't a sob story. It was simply me, telling the truth about family, loss, and the courage to walk away. The responses surprised me. Messages poured in from strangers thanking me for speaking out, from foster kids sharing their own stories, from people who'd felt unseen for years. One message stood out. From my Aunt Lydia. Her words were simple. "I'm sorry for the pain we caused. I hope you find peace." I didn't reply. Peace wasn't something she could give me, it was something I had to take. That summer, Clara and I hosted a small art show. It was a celebration not just of my work, but of the life I was building. Friends, neighbors, even some old colleagues came. We laughed, shared stories, and danced under string lights. I caught myself smiling without the familiar ache of loneliness. I realized I was no longer carrying the weight of their rejection. I was lighter, freer. One night, as I packed away the leftover paintings, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. But this time, I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. I typed back, "I'm living my life now. If you want to be part of it, you'll respect that." The days passed without another message. And that was okay. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I was waiting for my own next step. I began mentoring young artists from the community, teaching them to find their voice, to claim their space. With every workshop, I saw myself in their eyes, the longing to be seen, the hunger to be heard. I told them, "You don't have to wait for permission to shine." The truth is, family isn't just blood or tradition. It's the people who stand beside you when everything falls apart. It's the ones who lift you up without expecting anything back. My mother showed me that, long before anyone else did. I didn't lose my mother the day she passed away. I lost her the day they chose to laugh at her memory. But in standing up, I found her again. Not in their approval, not in their recognition, but inside myself. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see a man who has survived, who has reclaimed his dignity, who no longer fears being invisible. I see someone who knows the power of saying no, the power of walking away, the power of choosing himself. And that, more than anything, is the legacy I want to leave. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is to protect yourself, to say enough, to finally be seen. And in that moment, I found peace. The weeks after the rehearsal dinner were a blur of silence and noise, the kind of silence that screams inside your head, and the noise of my own heart pounding in disbelief. I blocked their numbers, their emails, their messages on every platform. I deleted the photos from my phone, photos that once reminded me of love, now just scars. But I didn't retreat into bitterness. Instead, I decided to reclaim my story on my terms. The box with my mother's keepsakes became my sanctuary. Every letter, every photo, every worn handkerchief was a reminder that love existed beyond their cruelty. One afternoon, I opened her old recipe book, the one I'd begged to learn from her when I was a kid. I baked her rosemary biscuits. The aroma filled my apartment, warm and familiar. It was my silent tribute. Then I started a small blog just to write, to vent, to share. I wrote about grief, about loss, about finding strength when no one else believes in you. I shared the rehearsal dinner story, not to shame, but to shine light on how cruelty can hide behind smiles. The response was overwhelming. Messages from people who'd been through similar pain. People who needed to hear, "You are not alone." Some days were harder than others. But every time I felt weak, I remembered what my mother taught me, the quiet strength of just showing up. Months later, I found myself at a local charity event supporting families dealing with cancer. I spoke about my mother, about love and loss, about the courage to stand up even when it's painful. Afterward, a woman approached me. She told me her own family had fractured after a similar loss. She thanked me for giving her hope. And I realized something. My mother's legacy wasn't in the memories my ex-fiancé's family tried to tarnish. It was in the lives she touched, in the love she gave, in the strength she inspired. In me, the locket she gave me, tucked safely away now, was more than jewelry. It was a symbol of resilience, of choosing love over hurt, of honoring those who believe in you even if others don't. Today, I'm still healing, still learning to trust, still learning to love without fear. But I'm no longer defined by their cruelty or their silence. I'm defined by the courage to walk away, to speak out, to reclaim my worth. And if I could say one thing to anyone who's ever felt invisible or discarded, it's this. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from those who refuse to see you. Because in that moment, you don't lose, you begin. And that is how I chose to live.